lighthouses at the edge of New Zealand, and the Keepers Who Vanished New Zealand sells you a postcard.
The dramatic beauty of New Zealand's South Island is defined by these vast...
The Milford Sound cruise with a complimentary glass of Sauvignon Blanc. Somewhere on that postcard there's usually a lighthouse too. White tower, blue sky, a nice place to take a photo before you get back in the camper van and drive to the next stop on the itinerary. That is the brochure version. It is not a lie, exactly. It is just incomplete. Because for every lighthouse you can drive to, photograph inside of 20 minutes, there is another one at the true edge of this country. 3 days walk from the nearest one. A boat ride across water that has swallowed ships up there.
Hidden within the persistent mists of Cuvier Island, the lighthouse stands as a solid...
These places were staffed for generations by families who baked their own bread, buried their own children, and watched the same beam of light sweep the same dark water 10,000 nights in a row. Some left quietly when the job was automated out from under them. Some left in a hurry, and some, in the truest sense of the word, never really came back. Tonight I'm taking you to 12 of those places. North Island,
as the golden hour light,
cast iron and cut stone. Some you can still walk to if your knees are good. Others you will only ever see from a boat, or the air, or a photograph taken by someone who had good reason to be out there. Go on, subscribe, and I'll tell you the whole story. Number 12.
The Cape Egmont lighthouse stands as a solitary sentinel against the powerful Tasman Sea.
Where the light has been confused, dismantled, and dragged across the country more than once in its history. The tower was never actually built in New Zealand. Cast in London in 1864, shipped out and assembled on Martin Island near Wellington in 1865. For over a decade, it did its job well enough, except for one problem. Ships kept confusing its beam with the light at Pencarrow Head and running into trouble because of it. By 1877, the tower was taken apart section by section, ferried ashore in surf boats and hauled by bullock teams to the Taranaki coast. It was relit at Cape Egmont on the 1st of August 1881. That is the official story. What the shipping records do not dwell on is what the lighthouse walked into when it arrived. A few kilometres away sat Parihaka, the community led by Te Witi o Rongomai and Tohu Kakahi, practicing a form of non-violent resistance to land confiscation that would later be studied around the world. Local Maori had good reason to delay the tower's construction.
Even here, at the edge of the world, the colonial presence was in force.
Was to station around 40 members of the armed constabulary at the site to force the work through. For its first 6 months, an armed policeman stood guard on the tower's lower floor, not against smugglers or storms, but against the very community whose land the light now stood on. The official position was always that the lighthouse was a neutral aid to navigation, and yet a light guarded by soldiers, built on confiscated ground, next to a peaceful settlement soon to be violently invaded, is not really neutral at all. It is a marker of who had power and who did not. The keepers who lived there afterwards knew none of the details of Parihaka's fate firsthand. Most came later, once the light had settled into its long, uneventful century of service. But the tower they tended had been placed there, quite literally, by force. Every time the beam swept west over the black sand towards the Tasman Sea, it swept back east over the same land that had been taken to make room for it. Whether that history sits differently with people today than it did with the keepers of a century ago is very much a matter of who you ask. The lighthouse still stands. Its original lens is on display a few kilometres away, in a replica tower that does not shine. The real one keeps working, automated now, indifferent to who is watching. Number 11. Nugget Point, Tokatā to give it its proper name. Wild edge of the Cape Palliser in Otago, where the enormous stone of the country's lighthouse network still catches the first light of a Southland. Built in 1869, first lit in July 1870, Nugget Point's tower is barely 9.5 metres tall, standing on a headland 76 metres above the sea. Small compared to some of its cousins.
For over a century, this beacon has got
placed exactly where it is, on a narrow spine road jutting into some of the world's Otago coast, named by Captain Cook for the wave-worn island distance like nuggets of gold. This was Kai, Tahu, land and water, long before any lighthouse existed, and it remains a treasured site for the iwi today. A coast already rich with meaning, now overlaid with a navigational light and a small stone cottage. The isolation here took a quieter form than elsewhere on this list. No shipwreck legend, no arson, no headline-making tragedy, just year after year of watching fur seals all out below. Sooty shearwaters wheel overhead each summer, and yellow-eyed penguins, among the rarest in the world, come ashore in nearby Roaring Bay in near total silence.
As twilight descends, the yellow-eyed penguins, or hoiho,
of some of the last untouched wildlife on this coast.
The iconic Nugget Point Lighthouse, a beacon of white stone against the deep cobalt blue of the vast Pacific Ocean.
The tower is fenced off now, admired through a chain-link barrier by tourists who really linger on the length of a photograph. What gets lost in that photograph is the sound. Waves working the rocks, birds arguing over territory, wind that never really stops. The keepers lived inside that sound for decades.
High above the churning waters stands the Cape Palliser Lighthouse, a beacon.
Exactly why this headland had mattered to people for far longer than there had been a light on it at all. Number 10. Cape Palliser on the southern tip of the Wairarapa coast, where 258 steps are the only thing standing between the road and the line. The lighthouse here was
standing resolute against the relentless Cook Strait, the Cape Palliser Lighthouse in
the 19th century alone, roughly 20 ships were wrecked in or near Palliser Bay, a brutal tally that makes sense the moment you watch the swell coming off Cook Strait with nothing to slow it down. 6 months before the light was even switched on, a ship went down within 4 miles of the Otago. 12 of its 21 crew were drowned. The lighthouse arrived just months too late to save them. For the keepers, the danger did not end once the light was burning. The original access was a dirt track up a 58-metre cliff, genuinely hazardous in bad weather, of which Cape Palliser has no shortage. Not until 1912 was a proper set of 258 steps finally built. Supplies came in only once every 3 months, hauled up the cliff face by hand winch on a small railway line. Children raised at Cape Palliser did their schooling by correspondence and spent 11 months of the year at the lighthouse. They baked their own bread and ate what the sea provided. Behavioural codes for lighthouse families were strict in this era, a direct response, historical records suggest, to earlier episodes of keepers drinking heavily to pass the loneliness. Whether that reputation was fair to the men involved, or simply what isolation does to people left too long with too little company, is not something the official reports were ever much interested in exploring. The keepers were finally withdrawn in 1986, and the light has run itself since. Its red and white bands, the only lighthouse in the country marked that way, still visible from the top of a climb, now treated as a
at the
tourist
edge of the
challenge
North
rather than
Island,
a daily
Cape
commute.
Palliser's stands sentinel.
258 steps for a photograph. For decades, it was 258 steps for survival. Number 9. Dog Island, out in Foveaux Strait near Bluff, home to the tallest lighthouse in the entire country, and since 1989, home to absolutely no one. Standing 36 metres high, built from stone quarried on the island itself, completed in 1865, Dog Island Lighthouse was designed by James Balfour, an uncle of the novelist Robert Louis Stevenson, whose own family built lighthouses across Scotland for generations. His tower was the first in the country fitted with a revolving beam, a mechanism that stayed in service for 60 years. 3 keepers and their families once lived on this low, flat scrap, a couple of metres above sea level at its highest point, utterly exposed to whatever Foveaux Strait threw at it. Staffing dropped over the decades, first to 2 keepers, then to 1, as diesel power and later automation made each posting redundant. Children on Dog Island could not attend school on the mainland.
Dog Island, isolated at the edge of the world. Once every 3 months, the supply ship braves the currents.
And even that improvement came late. The Waikuaiti, a steamship of nearly 4,000 tons, ran aground on Dog Island. Thick fog in November 1939 was declared a total loss. Proof that even the tallest light in the country cannot always cut through what the strait throws up. The last keeper left in 1989. Since then, the island belongs to seabirds, the wind, and a black and white tower flashing once every 10 seconds for no one to see up close. Smaller stations can feel nearly quiet and abandoned. Dog Island, visible from the hills above on a clear day, feels less like an empty building and more like a monument to a way of life that no longer exists or decayed, is permanently, completely decayed. Number 8. East Cape, at the easternmost point of the North Island, where the lighthouse claims something no other structure in this country can. The honour, no less, of watching the sunrise before anywhere else on Earth. It is a friendly boast rather than
ascent through fog as meditation, each step a generation.
But few places on this planet greet an actual sunrise sooner than the clifftop above Pencarrow. The current lighthouse was not always here. It began offshore, on East Island, first lit in 1900. Frequent landslides made that site increasingly dangerous, and in 1922 the whole structure was dismantled and rebuilt on the mainland, 154 metres above the sea. 3 keepers once staffed the rebuilt station.
The East Cape, where the land meets the sea. For the keeper, this cottage was both a sanctuary.
Arrived in 1985. What remained was the climb, somewhere between 700 and 800 wooden steps, rising from a gravel car park at the end of a lonely 20-kilometre road. The official story treats the move from East Island as a straightforward matter of engineering. What it leaves out is the disruption to families who had built an entire existence around one exact patch of rock, only to be told the ground beneath their station was failing and they would need to start again elsewhere. Lighthouse life demanded permanence, the same walk, the same weather, the same view learned by heart over years. East Cape's keepers had that permanence taken from them by geology itself, decades before automation would have taken it in. Today, the steps have been closed on and off due to storm damage, most recently since 2023 with no confirmed reopening date. Visitors drive the gravel road, look up at the tower and leave without making the climb their grandparents' generation made as daily routine. The first sunrise in the world, and increasingly, nobody stands at the top to see it. Number 7. Farewell. Spit, at the very top of the South Island, where a lighthouse was built not on rock at all, but on sand that never stops moving. Construction began here in 1869 on a thin, curling arm of coastline so notorious for wrecking ships that a light became unavoidable. Building on sand created problems no clifftop lighthouse ever had to solve. Because the ground sat almost at sea level, the tower had to be built taller than usual just to be seen. The first structure, hardwood, lasted barely 2 decades before the abrasive, salt-laden sand wore it down so badly that in 1891 it was replaced with an open steel lattice frame designed to let the wind and rain pass straight through it. Even that did not tame the place. One night, a storm whipped up so much sand that the entire stockpile of bricks vanished under the dunes, never recovered. Fresh shipment ordered from scratch. Early attempts to grow gardens were swamped by high tides, or eaten to nothing by marauding wave. The macrocarpa trees that still shelter the old keeper's cottage were planted deliberately by woodland creepers. A small, stubborn act of permanence on a landscape that resisted it at every turn. 3 keepers and their families lived out there across the decades, reachable only by a mail route that began in 1946 using ex-army trucks driven straight down the beach, passengers exposed on an open deck to whatever the weather was doing. The Shepherd family, Frank and Dorothy, were among those who called it home in the late 1940s, one name among a short list reserved mostly in old heritage.
The array seems stable despite
Automation
the wind.
arrived in 1984,
yes, but
and
check the
last
voltage
keeper's
regulator
family
on...
packed up and left a place that had, for over a century, demanded they rebuild their gardens, their fences, and sometimes their entire supply of building materials against a landscape that simply would not hold still. The lighthouse remains solar-powered now, standing on ground that is still, quietly, patiently, trying to swallow it. If Farewell Spit unsettles you with how much the land itself seemed determined to erase the people living on it, wait until we get to number 1. Subscribe to show that these videos actually help and that they make sense. tells me this kind of history is worth continuing to dig up. Number 6. Pencarrow Head at the entrance to Wellington Harbour, where New Zealand's first permanent lighthouse was
The
kept.
Pencarrow
For 5
Lighthouse
remarkable
stands
years,
as a
by
solitary
widow
sentinel
with 5
against the
children
encroaching...
and nowhere else to go. George Bennett took the position of lighthouse keeper at Pencarrow in 1852, moving there with his wife Mary and their young family to conditions that, by his own account, were barely fit for habitation. The house is neither wind or waterproof, he complained to the colonial secretary. The stove is of very little use. The authorities were unmoved. Their daughter Eliza died during that first year. George himself was killed in a boating accident in June 1859. Mary Bennett did not leave. With 5 children and a 6th on the way, she took over the light herself. And when a proper permanent lighthouse replaced the old cottage-based beacon in January 1859, the authorities, apparently satisfied with the job she had already been doing unofficially for 4 years, appointed her as its first official keeper. Her salary was £125 a year, inclusive of firewood. Her male assistant, William Lyle, reportedly complained he could not face another winter under the direction of, in his words, only a woman. His complaint was ignored. Mary Bennett held the post for roughly 5 years before returning to England in 1865. She remains to this day the only woman to officially served as a lighthouse keeper. The official record treats this as a tidy piece of colonial era trivia. First lighthouse, first and only female keeper, case closed. What it understates is what those 5 years actually cost her. She buried her husband and daughter in an exposed headland before she was ever given the job that made her historically known. The appointment that history remembers as progressive was, from where Mary Bennett was standing, simply the only work left available to a woman who had already lost almost everything else the place had to offer. The lighthouse itself burned for 76 years before being replaced by an automated light at nearby Bearing Head in 1935. It still stands today, a registered historic place.
Standing proud against the elements, the Pencarrow Lighthouse has guided mariners through these treacherous waters since...
Mary Bennett's name is remembered. The full weight of what she survived to earn that footnote rarely makes it into the caption under her photograph. Number 5. Cape Breton, at the far tip of the peninsula guarding the Bay of Islands, where more than 100 keepers and their families lived across nearly 70 years, and where in 1905 an ordinary swim ended in tragedy. The light here was first lit on the 21st of February 1910, though the peninsula's importance long predates the tower. Manga, as it is properly known, holds deep spiritual significance to Ngati
the
Kuta,
towering cliffs
and
of the Bay of
Wairarapa
Islands
Taita
stand as a
Tokatā.
testament to nature's
An
power,
archaeological work
shrouded
nearby
in the...
suggests the Bay of Islands was among the first places Polynesian voyagers made landfall in Aotearoa, roughly 700 years ago. The crystalline rock of the headland is said to have reflected natural light long before any lamp was lit there. For the lighthouse families who lived at Cape Breton across the 20th century, daily life meant total isolation at the end of a peninsula reachable only on foot or by boat. A settlement of cliff-edge houses perched 146 metres above pounding surf. In 1905, 5 years before this lighthouse was even completed, 2 sons of the then keeper, George Sinclair, took what
The
should
rugged
have
beauty
been
of
a
the New
simple
Zealand
shortcut
coast
up the
reveals
cliffs
itself
after
through
a
the
swim.
morning mist,
They slipped.
a testament to the...
11-year-old Alexander fell roughly 20 metres. His younger brother Robert, aged 7, landed on top of it and survived, his fall cushioned by his brother's body. Alexander did not. The official position in the sparse records that survive is what it always was in these settings: an accident, noted, filed, and moved past. What that framing leaves out is what it must have meant to keep living and working at the exact site of your child's death, with no transfer available, no leave to grieve properly, simply the same light to tend the following night and every night after that. Isolation did not pause for tragedy at Cape Breton. It simply continued, indifferent the way isolation always does. The lighthouse operated until 1978, when the last keepers finally left, and an automated light took over. Visitors today can book a night in the old keeper's cottage after an 8-hour walk along cliffs that, by every account, remain every bit as dizzying as they were in 1905. Whether they think about the Sinclair boys while they're up there is, understandably, not something most tourism brochures mention. Number 4. Stevens Island, Takapourewa, to use its correct name, in the churn of Cook Strait, where a single small bird went extinct almost the exact moment science learned it existed, and where the blame has quietly followed one lighthouse keeper's cat for well over a century. Workers arrived on Stevens Island in April 1892 to build a lighthouse securing the western approaches to Cook Strait. Until then, the island had barely been touched by human hands. Dense, untouched forest, no introduced predators, and living quietly among the rocks, a small, flightless, nocturnal wren found nowhere else on Earth. The keeper who eventually gave the bird its scientific name, David Lyle, described it running around the rocks like a mouse, too quick for him to ever catch a proper look. He did not need to catch it. His cat did that for him. At least one pregnant cat arrived with the construction crews in February 1894. And by that
Battling
winter,
the persistent
its
mist and rugged terrain, the construction of the lighthouse began.
Nobody in the scientific world had ever catalogued. 10 specimens reached collectors that year, arriving almost the exact moment naturalists Walter Buller and Walter Rothschild were independently racing to describe the species. A handful more turned up in 1895. The last confirmed specimen, by some accounts, as late as 1899. 15 birds still sit in museum drawers today, the entire known record of a species discovered and destroyed within a single lighthouse posting. The popular version blames one cat, sometimes even named Tibbles, for wiping out the species alone. The real record is messier. A whole population of feral cats descended from that arrival overran the island within a few years, tearing through several other native
Stevens
bird species
Island,
before
or
being
Takapourewa,
eradicated
is a
decades
vital
later.
sanctuary.
A newspaper account from 1895 put it plainly. The Marine Department, when it sends lighthouse keepers to isolated islands, should take care that they are not allowed to take cats. Foresight that arrived, as it so often does, years too late. No keeper on Stevens Island set out to erase a species. Nobody was acting in bad faith, but an entire, uniquely evolved animal walked quietly out of existence.
Here, on
Because of a
Stevens
domestic
Island,
choice,
the lush native
nobody
bush
thought to
thrives in
question
the
at
cool
time.
shadow.
And the keepers who lived there afterwards inherited an island, permanently missing something it could never get back. The lighthouse itself still operates today, unmanned, what is now the Takapourewa Nature Reserve, its light sweeping over cliffs where the last of an entire evolutionary lineage once ran, briefly and unnoticed underfoot. If you've been out to any of the Cook Strait Islands and picked up on a story locals tell, that never quite makes it into the official Department of Conservation material, I genuinely want to know. Leave it in the comments. I read every. Number 3. Centre Island, known to Kai Tahu as Raratoka, sitting in the wild Foveaux Strait, where in 1943 2 lighthouse keepers went out fishing and never came home. Work began on Centre Island's timber tower in 1877 with cowrie shipped across specifically.
Forged in
for the job.
1878, this cowrie timber structure was a vital beacon across the treacherous.
3 keepers and their families staffed the station, largely self-sufficient, growing what they could and fishing the strait for the rest. As early as 1888, the principal keeper was writing formal complaints, familiar to almost every family on this list. This house has always been in stormy weather. Fishing was not a hobby at Centre Island. It was how families fed themselves between supply runs, and Foveaux Strait does not forgive carelessness. In 1943, 2 of the station's keepers went out on what should have been a routine fishing trip and drowned. The official record states this plainly, almost clinically, filed alongside notes about leaking roofs and delayed boats. What it cannot explain is what it meant for a station this small to lose 2 of its own men on the same afternoon, in water they had fished 100 times before without incident. There is no dramatic mystery here, no unexplained circumstances, just 2 men doing an ordinary task that had become ordinary precisely because the danger had, over the years, stopped feeling dangerous. That may be the most unsettling detail of all. Not that the sea was unpredictable, but that after decades of isolation, it had come to feel safe enough to stop respecting. Staffing dropped steadily after that. 2 keepers by the mid-1950s, one by 1977. The light was automated in 1987, and the last keeper left a station that had already given up 2 of its own surrounding. Centre Island is privately owned today, off limits to the public. Its light running unattended over a strait that has never stopped being as dangerous as it was in 1950. It has simply stopped having anyone close enough to notice. Number 2, Puysegur Point, at the utterly remote southwestern tip of Fiordland, where a man driven half out of his mind by a rotating beam burned the entire lighthouse down and held its keepers at gunpoint. First lit on the 1st of March 1879, Puysegur Point carried a reputation as one of the most punishing postings in the entire network. Gale-force winds, relentless rain, and sand flies thick enough to test any keeper made daily life near a trial. 3 married keepers and their families called this Edward home, cut off from the coast by 145 kilometres of the roughest terrain in the country, reachable only by boat on a track cut through dense bush. In 1942, that isolation collided with something no rulebook had accounted for. A man had spent roughly 6 months prospecting alone on nearby Cape Island, periodically visiting the station for supplies left by the government. According to the official inquiry, he had recently left a psychiatric hospital before heading south. Over months of solitary living, he became convinced the lighthouse's rotating beam was a deliberate plot to shine through his window and deny him sleep. On the 8th of February, he acted on that conviction, assaulted the keeper on duty, knocked him unconscious, smashed the radio telephone, and set fire to the wooden tower, watching it burn to the ground before stealing a rifle and returning to Cape Island, where he briefly held the remaining keepers at bay. The official closed the case as the act of a mentally unwell man acting alone. What it doesn't examine is the deeper unease underneath. That this was a place so remote a man could spend half a year there entirely alone with his own deteriorating thoughts before anyone realised something had gone badly wrong. Puysegur Point did not simply witness an act of violence. Its isolation may have helped manufacture the conditions for one. The new concrete lighthouse eventually replaced the burned tower, using a lantern room salvaged from another station further north. The keepers who came after inherited a posting already known for pushing one man past whatever line kept him tethered to reality. The last keepers left Puysegur Point in 1990, closing out one of the longest and most punishing chapters in the country's lighthouse history. And now, the one that opened us up on the list of vanished keepers for a reason. Number 1. Cuvier Island, Repanga in the Hauraki Gulf, New Zealand's most distant offshore light, and the place where isolation itself became the thing that quietly took people away. Completed in 1889, Cuvier's cast iron tower holds a genuine first in New Zealand engineering history. The first lighthouse in the country built using locally cast iron, rather than materials shipped from Britain. That achievement came at real cost to the men who built it. There was no beach near the site suitable for landing. Every piece of material had to be hauled by hand, 100 metres up a steep hillside from small boats bobbing. Weather permitting, 3 keepers and their families lived at Cuvier across the decades that followed, housed in a small sheltered valley near the only landing spot the island offered. Heavy fog surrounded the island so often that it became a defining feature of life there. The mainland vanishing from view for days, the supply boat's arrival becoming the single event around which entire months were organised. The isolation common to every station on this list reached, by most accounts, its most extreme form here. The Marine Department's own records concede as much, describing the loneliness at Cuvier as more extreme than practically anywhere else. A striking admission from a bureaucratic document, and the government's own quiet acknowledgement that this posting asked more of the people who took it than almost any other on the coast. Nobody at Cuvier disappeared the way a headline would want them to. No arson, no drowning, no single dramatic night. What vanished here happened slower and is harder to sit with because of how ordinary it looked from the outside. Families arrived, raised children who never knew a mainland childhood, watched the fog roll in and out for years and eventually left. Worn down not by any single event, but by the accumulated weight of total isolation, repeated for decades, until automation in 1982 finally ended the need for anyone to do it at all. That is what actually happened at the edge of this country's coast, over and over for more than a century. Not disappearances in the dramatic sense. Something quieter and, in its own way, sadder. Ordinary people slowly worn down, away by exactly the kind of isolation the rest of us now drive out to photograph for 20 minutes before getting back in the car. Questions too. Do we owe the people who kept a light burning so the rest of us could sail safely past? The place itself was, bit by bit, taking something to 12 lighthouses, 12 different ways the far edge of this country asked something of the people who lived there. A marriage, a child, a species, a sense of safety, or simply years quietly spent somewhere the rest of New Zealand rarely thought to. What strikes me, going through all 12 together, is how little of it had to do with storms or shipwrecks in the end. The real danger at most of these stations was never really the sea. It was the years, the fog that never lifted, the supply boat that came once a season instead of once a week, the same view repeated so many times it stopped registering as a view at all. New Zealand likes to talk about its wide open spaces as a gift. For the families who kept these lights burning, that same emptiness was often simply the job. Most of these towers still stand. A handful are open to the public. A few, like Centre Island and Dog Island, will never let another visitor through the door. But every one of them outlasted the people who tended it, which feels, the more I think about it, like the truest thing anyone could say about a lighthouse. It is built to survive exactly the conditions that eventually wear its keepers down. The light goes on. The people do not always make it through untouched. I am a grandpa, and grandpas worry. Look after yourself.